LM Radio was South Africa's only music radio station which started broadcasting in 1936 and set the standard for adult contemporary radio from 1950 to its close in October 1975. Chris Turner talks to some of the people who made LM Radio the #1 music station. Today, he is talking to John BERKS. This is part 1.
John BERKS was a highly regarded and well-known radio presenter and broadcaster in South Africa. He started out in music radio and later became one of South Africa's first talk show hosts. He started his career at LM Radio, and I had the privilege of knowing John and chatted with him on a number of occasions about his time on radio. John was also a great champion of the relaunched LM Radio in 2010 and made several guest appearances on the station and also at our live events in Gauteng. Over the next few weeks, I'll be playing some of my fireside chats with John. So, John, tell me, how did you get into radio?
Well, when I was a little schoolboy, I'll never forget, I think it was Jackie Cheatham's side to England, around about 1951. And with my late father, we'd be glued to an old walnut chassis radio set with a little yellow light that would indicate when you were tuned into the particular station. And I was totally fascinated by the spoken word and the picture that the spoken word could paint. And I would be in total awe listening to the likes of John Arlott and Rex Austin and Charles Fortune of the SABC, who then formed a part of that commentary team. So I'm going back to the very, very early 50s. And I never forget, I think it must have been Birmingham, when John Arlott did that little commentary, Tayfield taps the toe as he turns again from the Vauxhall Lane end and comes into bowl to Compton is not out 25. And it was just perhaps the voice, the delivery, the picture that it painted. And I thought, well, if the spoken word can paint pictures the way these people allow them to be painted, then I want to be a part of it. And ever since then, I was 2 bricks and a ticky high. I think I was all of the age of 9 or 10. That was it for me. I was hooked on radio, and I wanted to be a radio broadcaster. Perhaps I had dreams of becoming a cricket commentator because of the influence of cricket, but it wasn't easy. I left school early. I did not complete my I didn't complete my high school. I left school in those days in what they called, with a JC certificate, Standard 8. I got myself a job in Johannesburg as a factory hand. But there was always something behind being just an ordinary factory hand, and that was that at least I'd moved away from a tiny little town about 100 miles from Klerksdorp, and now I was close to the SABC, which I suppose for me was like a young actor being close to Universal or Paramount or Warner Brothers. And from the factory, each and every Wednesday, it'd take me a long time, but finally I organized for one of the broadcasters, Colin Duplessis, who spoke rather beautifully for the A program, which was the non-commercial radio station for the service for the SABC, and he would invite me up to the studio and give me a half-hour lesson in enunciation and pronunciation and all the other things that go with broadcasting. So I didn't really have to hop in a shower at 4 o'clock. My lesson was at 5 because all I had to do was throw some water on my face, and with all the soap suds, because I was working in this soap factory, there was enough lather and enough soap to give me a bright and shiny little face, and I'd catch the 22 from the southern suburbs of Johannesburg to the SABC in Commissioner Street. In those days, it was the old building in Commissioner Street, to be taught by Colin Duplessis that JUST was just and not gist, and it was Qui de Fire, Donizetti, Dvorak, Chopin, Mozart, and it obviously it was more of a comedy half hour for me than anything else. But there I was sitting in one of the studios of the SABC, and for me, that half hour was the most precious half hour of my life. Working at the soap factory wasn't easy. I spent 3 years as a factory hand, but at the same time I knew that somehow I was in the big city, and this was an opportunity for me to try and get into radio. And besides doing the half-hour lesson session with Colin Duplessis, I then got involved. I thought, well, if I can't get into the spoken word, into radio right now, during that period of time, I would try the written word. So I returned to this little town called Clarkstorp, where I was born and raised, and I worked for the local newspaper as an advertising man. I wrote a bit of copy, I did visuals, the layout, and in fact, even in a little two-door Morris Minor, I used to go around and drop the newspaper off at certain little corners in the town to sell the newspaper on a Friday. I met a man called Andrew Braid, who ran a newspaper called the Germiston Advocate, and he said, I believe you write copy. And I said, yep. And he said, is this your dream, to be a copywriter, to write copy for advertising? And I said, yes, it was, knowing that that was a load of bull, pardon my expression. But it was a further step, because he was offering me a job as a reporter for the Germiston Advocate. I came up to Germiston, I did the job. Now, whilst I was with the Germiston Advocate as a very bad reporter, I had 4 auditions with the then Lorenzo Marx Radio. And Rob Vickers handled all the auditions and failed me on each and every one of them. And then turned to me and said, well, I've got to be very honest with you. You seem a nice enough person, but you don't really have it. So that knocked the wind right out of my sail. It was the most disappointing comment I'd ever heard, but I thought, no, it's not going to get me down. And one day at the Germiston Advocate, I'd seen a photograph of Rob Vickers, who was going back to Australia, his land of birth, to visit family, and would be replaced by a man called Jerry Wilmot. So I thought, aha, this is my chance. Perhaps Wilmot may believe that I do have some kind of talent. And I got to cut the story short, because with the first audition I had with Wilmot, he explained that they did have a vacancy. A man by the name of Frickie Miller was one of the members of staff on LM Radio. He had decided to go back to his original profession, and that was school teaching. So they had this vacancy. I did the audition, and Wilmot said, well, kiddo, it sounded fine, and I'll let you know this afternoon. Well, I couldn't wait, so I got back to the Germiston Advocate, and I said to Mr. Andrew Braid, Mr. Braid, I've got to be very honest with you. Thank you for allowing me time off this morning. But the reason that I really went into the city of Johannesburg was to do an audition for LM Radio, and I got the job. And he said, well, I'm glad you told me, because even if you didn't get the job, I wouldn't have taken you back, because I know where your heart lies. It lies in radio and not in the world of journalism. And that's how it started for me. Wilmot was the man who gave me the job, and he said the audition was fine, but what you'd have to do is we'll take a few postcards, requests, dedications, take them up to Edgar Blatt, who was then the chairman of the board of Davenport and Mayor, Edgar Blatt, and just read them off to him, and if he's satisfied, it'll be okay. And I read 1 or 2 little requests, and Edgar Blatt said, well, it sounds okay to me, you got the job. And that's how it started.
And that's how John BERKS ended up at LM Radio. I'll continue my fireside chat with John BERKS in a future episode. I'm Chris Turner.
That was Chris Turner talking to John BERKS. Watch out for part 2. Visit www.lmradio.co.mz and check out the historical pages.